Holy smokes, baseball fans! Drop everything you're doing right now because we are about to expose the absolute madness happening across Major League Baseball as we speak. The offseason has reached a fever pitch, and three massive franchises are scrambling, panicking, and desperately trying to figure out their next moves after being blindsided by the biggest signings of the winter. We're talking about the Toronto Blue Jays in complete crisis mode after missing Kyle Tucker. The New York Mets still hungry despite landing Bo Bichette, and the Philadelphia Phillies left standing at the altar after losing out on their top target. And right in the middle of all this chaos are two premium names that could completely reshape the entire landscape of baseball: Cody Bellinger and Framber Valdez. The dominoes are falling, the phone lines are burning up, and by the time you finish watching this breakdown, you're going to know exactly where every single piece is going to land. This isn't speculation. This isn't guesswork. This is cold, hard analysis of what's really going down behind closed doors in front offices across the league. So settle in, because we're about to take you on a wild ride through the most dramatic offseason storyline that nobody else is talking about. Let's start with the Toronto Blue Jays, because their situation is absolutely fascinating, and frankly, kind of heartbreaking if you're a fan up north. Think about what just happened to this franchise. They went all in, and I mean all in, on Kyle Tucker. 10 years, $350 million was their offer. Let that number marinate in your brain for a second. 10 years, $350 million. That's franchise-altering money. That's the kind of offer that's supposed to get deals done. That's the kind of commitment that shows a player you're serious about building a championship roster around them. And you know what happened? Tucker looked at that offer, appreciated it, probably even considered it for a hot minute, and then said thanks but no thanks, I'm going to the Dodgers. Can you imagine being Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro in that moment? You swing for the fences. You authorize ownership to open the checkbook wider than it's ever been opened before, and you still come up empty. That's devastating. That's the kind of rejection that forces you to go back to the drawing board and rethink your entire strategy. Now, the Blue Jays are sitting there looking at their roster, trying to figure out what comes next. Let's examine what they've got. The rotation looks pretty solid, actually. You've got Kevin Gausman and Jose Barrios at the top, which is a respectable 1-2 punch. Shane Bieber is in the mix, though there's uncertainty about whether he'll be ready for opening day after his injury issues. Even if he's not, you've got depth with guys like Yusei Kikuchi and Chris Bassett providing veteran stability. They signed Yariel Rodriguez. They've got Bowden Francis. They've got options. And when you factor in where their payroll sits right now, when you consider the luxury tax penalties they'd face by adding more salary, it feels like the rotation is probably done. They're not making any more moves on the pitching side. That ship has sailed. But the lineup? Oh man, the lineup is where things get really interesting and really complicated. Obviously, they were aggressively pursuing Kyle Tucker. That 10 years, $350 million offer wasn't just a number they threw out there casually. That was a serious, genuine attempt to land a generational talent. And while it's absolutely crazy that a deal that size doesn't get it done, you understand completely why Tucker chose the Dodgers. Look at what Los Angeles is building over there. They've got Shohei Ohtani. They've got Freddie Freeman. Heck, they've got Mookie Betts. And now they've added Tucker to that monster lineup. They're not just trying to win, they're trying to create a dynasty. The Blue Jays can put together a roster that strongly contends for the American League East crown. Sure. But winning your division is just a stepping stone. It's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is what they failed to accomplish in October. And that's getting back to the World Series and actually winning the thing. So here's the question that's keeping Blue Jays management up at night. Can this current roster hang with the Dodgers if they meet in the World Series? Because that's the standard now. That's the measuring stick. The Dodgers just added Kyle Tucker to their already stacked lineup. They added Edwin Diaz to their bullpen. They're getting another year of development from Roki Sasaki. And most importantly, Shohei Ohtani isn't going to be going through essentially a rehab process throughout half the season like he did last year. He should be at full strength, both hitting and pitching, which is absolutely terrifying for the rest of baseball. If you're the Blue Jays, you have to look at that and realize you need more. That's why they were in on Tucker. But now that he's off the board, does it mean they pivot to Cody Bellinger? This is where it gets absolutely wild, folks. The answer to that question entirely depends on whether the Blue Jays front office puts Cody Bellinger on the same pedestal they had Kyle Tucker on. And here's the brutal truth. They shouldn't, and they probably won't. I watch a tremendous amount of baseball. I study the game obsessively. I wouldn't put Bellinger on that same level, and I'm pretty confident most serious baseball analysts wouldn't either. But here's where the plot thickens. Cody Bellinger is reportedly asking for 7 years at $30 million per year. Now, quick math, that's $210 million total. Hey, that's significantly less than what it would have cost to get Kyle Tucker. From a pure dollars and cents perspective, the Blue Jays should be able to get that deal done, right? They were willing to spend $350 million on Tucker. So spending $210 on Bellinger should be a piece of cake. But hold on just a minute. Because there's a major complication that most people aren't talking about. After the Blue Jays signed Ernie Clement, someone from their front office, either Ross Atkins or Mark Shapiro, made a very revealing comment. They said that any more position players added would take playing time away from guys they already feel good about. And who are those guys? Addison Barger and Ernie Clement himself. So if you go out and grab Cody Bellinger, somebody's losing playing time. Somebody who the organization believes in, somebody who they've invested development resources in, is going to be sitting on the bench more than they'd like. Are you comfortable with that as a front office? Are you comfortable telling a young player who showed promise that we're bringing in a veteran to take his spot? Here's what makes this even more complicated. There are absolutely Blue Jays fans out there who are actually happy that the team didn't pay what the Dodgers paid for Kyle Tucker. They like the young players they have. They believe those guys can develop into solid contributors. They think this roster, as currently constructed, can put together a competitive season without breaking the bank on a mega. So the fundamental question facing Toronto right now is this. Do they go get Cody Bellinger now? Or do they start the season with what they have, and then maybe trade for somebody at the deadline when specific needs become clearer? Both strategies have merit. Both could work. The nice thing about adding Bellinger now is that it gets the Blue Jays ahead of next year's offseason, when both George Springer and Dalton Varsho will likely walk in free agency. You'd be replacing that production before you actually lose it, which is smart roster management. But I've reached a point in my analysis where I honestly don't think the Blue Jays are going to pull the trigger on Cody Bellinger. I think the race for his services is really tight between him and the New York Yankees. Maybe the Mets swoop in if Cody changes his mind on the number of years he's demanding. But as far as the Blue Jays go, I'm genuinely doubtful. I'd put it at about 70% they're done making moves and 30% they try to work something out with Bellinger. That 70-30 split really just depends on how Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro feel when they take a long, hard look at this lineup and ask themselves the critical question, is it good enough? What do you think, folks? Whether you're a Blue Jays fan or not, is this roster good enough to compete for a championship? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I'm genuinely curious to hear what you all think about Toronto's situation. Are they making a mistake by potentially standing pat? Or is it smart to trust their young talent and not overpay for a player who might not move the needle enough? Now, let's shift our attention to the New York Mets. Because their situation is equally fascinating for completely different reasons. Let's examine their lineup and rotation. Because you could make a very strong argument they need one significant addition in each area. They clearly need an ace. Look at their starting rotation right now. It's a solid group of pitchers. Don't get me wrong, but there's no clear number one ace sitting at the top. There's no guy you can confidently hand the ball to in a playoff Game 7 and feel certain he's going to dominate. They need to go out and find that pitcher. Or maybe they just decide to go with the depth approach and roll with what they've got. You know, bring up guys like Jonah Tong and Brandon Sproat from the minors. These guys came up late last season, and while it felt early and definitely wasn't something the Mets had originally planned to do, now they're at higher levels in the minor league system. They've gotten a taste of the big leagues. Maybe you do have a plan for them to throw 75 to 100 innings at the major league level this year. Or you're at least comfortable if that situation arises naturally. Let's say the Mets find a trade partner for Starling Marte, or somebody gets hurt, or they decide to move Clay Holmes to the bullpen. There are options and flexibility built into this roster, but there's still clearly no ace, and that's a problem for a team with championship aspirations. When we think about the lineup, they've added Bo Bichette, which is huge. They've added Jorge Polanco. They've added Marcus Semien. The addition of Bichette actually bumps Mark Vientos out of the everyday lineup equation, unless you start getting creative with defensive positions. Brett Beatty seems like a pretty good defender. Could he move to the outfield? Are we seriously talking about taking somebody out of this crowded infield and shifting them to the outfield just to keep everyone's bat in the lineup? Otherwise, Mark Vientos suddenly finds himself without a clear path to regular at-bats. Maybe he becomes the odd man out. Maybe he's the one who gets traded. There's been a tremendous amount of speculation about exactly that scenario. We can talk about potential Mets trades in just a moment. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. An outfield addition is absolutely required before spring training. Expecting Carson Bench to be ready for a starting role would be completely unrealistic. Let's just put it that way and move on. Tyrone Taylor should not be your everyday center fielder if you have legitimate World Series aspirations. So there are 2 outfield spots that need addressing, and you need to get at least one quality player locked in before pitchers and catchers report. You could go into spring training and see how Bench performs. And if he's great, fantastic. He bumps Tyrone Taylor and that's all that happens. But we absolutely cannot have a situation where the Mets are going into spring training hoping that both of those guys are ready to contribute at a high level. That's wishful thinking, not championship roster construction. You've got to get another outfielder. You've got to make that happen. So is it Cody Bellinger? This is where things get really interesting from the Mets' perspective. I don't think it's Bellinger, and here's why. Everything we're hearing is that Cody wants that 7th year. The Yankees are firm at 5 years. Maybe, just maybe, he settles at 6. But no matter what, if Bellinger is looking for 5 or more guaranteed years, I think the Mets are completely out of the equation. Now, theoretically, could the Mets go and basically give him the same structure as the Bo Bichette deal, which was shorter term with I don't think Bellinger wants to go through that again. He has been living the option-laden, opt-out-filled contract lifestyle for the past several years. He's been the opt-out king of the offseason these last couple cycles. I genuinely don't think he wants to do that dance again. I think he wants the guaranteed money. I think he wants the security of a long-term deal. I don't think he wants to keep doing this free agency shuffle every single year. So I'm in the camp. I'm of the belief that Bellinger wants the years. And that desire will rule the New York Mets out of serious contention for his services. So what are the Mets actually doing here if Bellinger's not an option? It's got to be a trade, right? Because after Bellinger, the next best available outfielder on the free agent market is Harrison Bader. But after how things went the last time he was in Queens, I'm going to pass on that reunion. I know Bader's coming off a solid year, but I just don't see that happening. Maybe he simply wasn't comfortable playing in New York. Maybe the pressure got to him. I don't know the exact reason, but I'm just not going down that road again if I'm the Mets. So I've got to get into the trade market, right? Let's run through the possibilities. I don't think Cleveland is trading Steven Kwan because they haven't really added anybody significant this offseason. If they're not bringing in reinforcements, they can't afford to send out quality players. They still want to contend in a wide-open American League Central. I don't see the Mets as a good trade partner for the Boston Red Sox either. So I'm ruling out Jarren Duran. I'm ruling out Rafael Devers because what the Red Sox are going to want in return, I don't believe the Mets have in their system. About a week and a half ago, maybe the Mets could have swung a deal and sent one of their starting pitchers. Maybe David Peterson and some prospects, something that would help the Red Sox rotation right now. But now Boston's rotation is in good shape after their moves. They could use maybe a bullpen piece or two, but at the end of the day, I'm talking this scenario out and giving it too much airtime. I just don't see the Mets as a realistic trade partner for Jarren Duran, so we cross off Taylor Ward from the Angels. We cross off Duran from Boston. Obviously, we know Kyle Tucker isn't getting dealt since he just signed. I don't think the Mets are doing anything with the Pirates for Brian Reynolds. They're obviously not going to trade for Nicholas Castellanos and that albatross contract. So, we're starting to see the well run dry pretty quickly here. But I do have one name, and I'm hoping that some of you sharp baseball minds out there are already thinking about it. We haven't heard this name mentioned a ton this offseason, but that's because we kind of needed to get to this exact point. When the outfield market well is running completely dry, now is the perfect time for Luis Robert Jr. to get traded. And I genuinely feel like the Mets are the perfect trade partner for the Chicago White Sox. Think about this for a second. It's only 2 years remaining on Robert's contract at $20 million per year. It's a 2-year commitment. Sign David Stearns up for that right now. It's only 2 years of risk. I absolutely believe there's a bounce back coming from Robert. We saw some positive trends in his hitting metrics and overall production in the second half of last season. We know he's going to play elite defense in center field when healthy. I'll take him for 2 years all day long. And what are the White Sox going to want in return? Prospects. Young, controllable talent. And guess what? The Mets have plenty of that to offer. They're a perfect trade partner from Chicago's perspective, and Robert is a perfect roster fit for New York's needs. So let's do it. Luis Robert Jr. to the Mets. That's my prediction for what's next in their outfield. From the pitching side of things, the Mets need to go out and get an ace, like we discussed. When we think about the aces that are still available as free agents, Framber Valdez and Zach Gallen both have qualifying offers attached to them. That's a massive complication. There's no way the Mets are doing a short-term deal for a guy that might opt out after 1 year when they also have to give up significant draft pick compensation on top of the financial commitment. And that draft pick compensation is especially painful because the Mets are over the luxury tax threshold and they're a repeat offender, which means they'd be giving up even more valuable picks. So I'm not doing Valdez or Gallan. I'm on a 2 or 3 year deal with opt-outs after every season while also partying with premium draft picks. No chance. I'm ruling those guys out as free agent options, so I'm back in the trade market for pitching. Because the other guys that are out there as free agents, like guys like Ross Stripling and Michael Lorenzen, they're just more of what the Mets already have. They're middle-of-a-rotation depth pieces, not difference makers, so let's get into the trade market and think about realistic targets. Dylan Cease. No, I don't think he's getting dealt by San Diego. The Padres are trying to contend, and that ship has sailed on trading him. I know there's been Mackenzie Gore speculation, but I don't think that's realistic either. The Twins aren't trading Pablo Lopez. This could potentially be a destination for Cole Ragans from Kansas City, but it's going to cost an absolute fortune to get him, because he has multiple years of control remaining, and he's still young. I don't see a Hunter Green deal materializing with Cincinnati. Going over to Kansas City, Chris Bubik isn't significant enough to move the needle for a championship contender. This is not a Brady Singer destination either, because again, he's just more of what they already have. He's a middle-of-a-rotation guy, and middle-of-a-rotation guys are fine for rebuilding teams, but for aspiring championship contenders, you need more. But there is a name I've deliberately left out, and I'm really hoping some of you already figured out where I'm going with this. It's Freddie Peralta from the Milwaukee Brewers. This is the answer, folks. This is the move that makes so much sense for both sides. The Mets are an excellent trade partner for Milwaukee. Peralta is exactly what New York clearly needs, a legitimate top-of-the-rotation piece who can anchor a playoff staff. And here's the beautiful part. The Mets can send David Peterson back to Milwaukee to fill the rotation spot they're creating. They could package Peterson with Mark Vienna. They could stock the Brewers up with right-now pieces that help bolster both their rotation and their lineup simultaneously. I'm not saying the final package is necessarily Peterson and Vientos and a prospect, but you see what I'm getting at here. There are multiple Major League-ready pieces that the Mets could realistically send to Milwaukee to get this deal done. Maybe it's Brett Baty instead of Vientos. There's been persistent Brett Baty trade speculation all winter. Maybe he's the one who goes to the Brewers. Though I know Milwaukee has Willie Adames over there now, and they're feeling pretty good about that acquisition, so they probably don't want another shortstop. And Christian Yelich has reached the point in his career where he might have to DH for load management purposes. So you can probably find the right combination of right-now pieces and prospects from the Mets system. They are genuinely one of the few perfect trade partners for Freddie Peralta in all of baseball. So there we go. If you want to take this Mets team to the next level, there are a couple of specific trades they should be aggressively pursuing. Freddie Peralta and Luis Robert Jr. Make those two moves happen, and suddenly you're looking at a completely different ball club. Let's shift our focus to the Philadelphia Phillies next, because their situation might be the most emotionally devastating of all three teams we're discussing today. They were in heavy on Bo Bichette. They thought they had him. The rumor mill suggested they offered 7 years at $200 million. That's a massive commitment, and they genuinely believed that was going to get the deal done. And then Bo Bichette shocked everyone and went to the New York Mets instead. Can you imagine being in that front office? You make what you think is your best offer, You start planning your roster around having Bichette in the infield, and then he pulls the rug out from under you and signs with a division rival. That's brutal. The immediate pivot for Philadelphia was to JT Realmuto, re-signing their star catcher to keep the core together. And you know what? I had actually talked about how it might be better for the Phillies to get Realmuto and fill a new Blanc additional piece instead of putting all their eggs in the Bichette basket. Because here's the thing, they didn't need just one player. Bichette would have been one heck of an addition, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, he only checks one box on a roster that needs multiple boxes checked. JT Realmuto checks one of those critical boxes. Now they need to address at least one more, and I think that box is another outfielder. Nicholas Castellanos is already on the roster, so he's obviously not in play as an addition. Now I'm wondering if the fact that there was a club option to keep Castellanos on the team sort of keeps the Phillies out of super aggressive addition mode. But you've got Dalton Goem in the outfield mix. How are we feeling about him as an everyday starter? I honestly don't know. You've got Justin Crawford, a top prospect. But I'll say the same thing I just said about Carson Bench with the Mets. You cannot head into spring training expecting to simply hand the keys over to Crawford and hope everything works out. Just like you can't do it with Bench in New York. If these young guys go out there in spring training and absolutely dominate and earn their roster spots, fantastic. But you cannot head into a season when you're a team that wants to be playing deep into October. When you're a team with the highest goals and the highest expectations, and just cross your fingers that untested youth will carry you, there are other teams where this approach would be fine. Maybe your favorite team, if you're watching right now, would be perfectly comfortable going into the season with that mindset. But this is the Philadelphia Phillies we're talking about. This is a franchise that's expecting to compete for a World Series championship, so they absolutely need to add something significant to that outfield. The infield feels set with Tree Turner, Bryson Stott, Alec Bohm, and Bryce Harper at first base. I'm not adding a piece just to move Harper back into the outfield where his body might break down. I'm going straight to finding an outfield solution. And I have two realistic options that make sense for Philadelphia. One we've already talked about as a possibility for the Mets, and actually we've discussed both of them. But I put them out as options for New York, and they're going to be options here for the Phillies as well. First option, Luis Robert Jr. from the White Sox. Second option, Harrison Bader. Now here's the interesting distinction. I didn't have Bader as a realistic option for the Mets, but I absolutely have him here for the Philadelphia Phillies. Why? Because Bader was absolutely fantastic with the Phillies last year after they traded for him at the deadline. He played great defense, he contributed offensively, he fit seamlessly into the clubhouse culture. Bring him back. I want Harrison Bader in my outfield if I'm Philadelphia. And if I can't make that happen because we're having trouble with the years he's demanding or the total contract value, and do we want to trade for Luis Robert and count on that bounce back we discussed earlier? I would think the easier, cleaner financial play would be to simply re-sign Harrison Bader to a reasonable short-term deal. But the question is, what does Bader actually want? What's he looking for in terms of years and dollars? With Luis Robert, you know it's only going to be a 2-year commitment. That's locked in. But maybe Bader is going to try to take that renaissance season he just had and parlay it into a 3 or 4 year deal with better annual salary. I mean, we're getting late into the offseason now. I don't think that extended deal is going to materialize for him. But that doesn't mean his agent isn't still thinking that way and holding out for that kind of contract. And the Phillies can't wait around forever. Because as we've discussed multiple times already, the well of available outfielders is running completely dry. So one of these two moves feels like the play. Adding Robert or adding Bader is what I would absolutely do if I was running the Philadelphia Phillies. That's my recommendation for what comes next in Philadelphia. Now, let's dig deep into the two most prominent free agents that are still sitting out there on the board without teams. And I'm only saying 2 instead of 3 because while Zach Gallen is technically still a free agent, I've reached a conclusion about his market. What did I say earlier about short-term deals for pitchers who have qualifying offers attached to them? I'm not going there. Look, I know the Mets kind of just did it with Bo Bichette on the position player side, but I am personally very reluctant to go short-term when I'm simultaneously giving up valuable draft picks. Committing to 1 year for a player while also sacrificing draft picks just feels wrong to me. So I genuinely don't think we're going to have many serious takers for Valdez or Golan if they're insisting on short-term deals with opt-outs. I actually believe there's a very strong chance that Zach Gallen ends up right back in Arizona where he started. He goes back to the Diamondbacks on a one-year deal to rebuild his value. Think about it from both sides. Arizona was openly willing to add Alex Bregman's substantial contract to their payroll, so they clearly have some financial flexibility. Their rotation could absolutely use another quality arm. If I'm the Diamondbacks, I want to bring Gallen back and give it one more shot. And if I'm Gallen, I desperately want to go back to Arizona because I need to do this free agency process again next winter when I don't have a qualifying offer hanging around my neck like an anchor. That's the situation I need to create for myself. And I also want to be, this is important, I think it would be tremendously beneficial for Gallen to be in a free agent market alongside Dylan Cease next winter. Cease will drive the entire market for starting pitchers upward, and I want to be riding that wave if I'm Zach Gallen. So going back to Arizona on a one-year prove-it deal feels like a pretty strong likelihood in my opinion. Because I genuinely don't think the long-term deals are going to materialize for him this winter. So we're really talking about Framber Valdez and Cody Bellinger as the two mega free agents still available. Let's tackle Framber first. We're talking about short-term deals again potentially, and as I've explained, that might eliminate a bunch of potential suitors right off the bat. Obviously the Mets aren't in play for the reasons we've already discussed. I really only have two realistic teams left standing for Framber Valdez, and that's because to sign him, I think you've got to be willing to go longer on the years. You have to at least match that Ranger Suarez contract from last offseason. That was 5 years if I remember correctly. I think you have to guarantee at least 5 years, and if you're going 5 years without any opt-outs, the Mets are definitely out. I think it has to be 5 years fully committed, and here's why that matters to Valdez. If you have a major injury, if you go down and it costs you a year and a half or 2 full years of your career, you don't want to find yourself hitting free agency again while you've still got a year of rehab remaining. That's a nightmare scenario for any pitcher. You want those guaranteed years as protection? Framber Valdez? The way things are playing out right now in the market, I think he really has two legitimately good options remaining. I think it's the Baltimore Orioles and the San Francisco Giants. Those two teams should be absolutely all over this situation, and they should be exploiting the fact that the market probably isn't very robust for Valdez right now. Why would any team go short-term on a pitcher of his caliber? It doesn't make sense. And why would Valdez even want to accept a short-term deal? Honestly, even my Zach Gallen take. Look, if Gallen had a real choice in the matter, he wouldn't be doing a one-year deal either. I think Gallen is being forced into it because he's coming off a relatively down year. I know he was strong in the second half of the season and down the stretch, but I just don't think his market has materialized the way he and his agent hoped it would. So he may be forced into accepting that short-term prove-it contract. Framber Valdez has one additional complication that's been brought up repeatedly by media members, and it's something we need to address head-on. There was that whole controversial situation with his catcher, the cross-up incident that got blown out of proportion. I don't know if that's genuinely scaring teams away, or if it's just being used as an excuse by teams that don't want to commit to the years and dollars he's seeking. Maybe Valdez started out this offseason looking for something comparable to Dylan Cease's contract. But now that you have the Ranger Suarez contract out there as a more recent comparable, that probably sets the realistic framework for what he'll ultimately receive. And if he does sign something in that range, I think it'll be with either the Baltimore Orioles or the San Francisco Giants. Think about San Francisco's situation for a moment. Look at what the Los Angeles Dodgers have constructed this offseason. They're building a super team. If you're the Giants and you actually want to try to compete in that division, you desperately need to get another legitimate starting pitcher. I know they signed Justin Verlander. I know they got the guy who was with the White Sox and then the Rays last year, and I'm blanking on his name right now, even though he completely shut down the Blue Jays twice. It's driving me crazy that I'm forgetting his name. Adrian Houser. There it is. I know they signed Houser and they signed other depth pieces, but I think we can do significantly better than counting on those guys as frontline starters. Let Houser and some of these other acquisitions add rotation depth to the equation. The guy who doesn't crack the starting five out of spring training becomes a valuable long reliever. Okay. And you're first man up when somebody inevitably goes down with an injury. That's how you use those kinds of signings. I think it makes absolutely perfect sense for the San Francisco Giants to get aggressive on Framber Valdez. It also makes perfect sense for the Baltimore Orioles, and maybe even more so. This team has been incredibly aggressive this offseason. They've assembled one of the most potent lineups in all of baseball right now. But the pitching still has question marks even after trading for Corbin Burnes and even with Trevor Rogers coming off a solid year. We're waiting to see if Rogers can sustain that performance over a full season. You're getting Kyle Bradish back from injury for his first complete season after Tommy John surgery. I mean, look at how Luis Severino's first full season back from injury went. It's always unpredictable. The Orioles need insurance. They need certainty. I know committing 5 years and probably $125 to $150 million to Framber Valdez is a massive commitment. But if I'm the Baltimore Orioles, I've got a ton of young talent that's currently in arbitration or pre-arbitration status. I need to maximize the next 5 years as aggressively as I possibly can. This is my championship window. This is where I need to go, Elon. Now let's talk about Cody Bellinger. Okay? His situation might be the most complex and dramatic of anything we've discussed today. I've got 4 potential landing spots for him. First, the New York Mets. We've continued to hear persistent rumors about the Mets trying to swoop in and steal him. But again, if Bellinger wants to go long-term, I'm highly doubtful New York makes it happen. Second, the Toronto Blue Jays. If the Blue Jays had Kyle Tucker way up here on their priority list at the top tier, and they have Cody Bellinger way down here at a secondary tier, it just ain't happening. Simply because they missed out on Kyle Tucker doesn't automatically mean they pivot down to Bellinger. However, if they had Tucker here and Bellinger only slightly below him at a similar tier, maybe there's a better chance this happens. Because the money difference and contract structure difference kind of evens everything out. Only time will tell on that front. Third potential destination, the Yankees. We know New York has been heavily linked to Bellinger throughout this entire process. And fourth, the Philadelphia Phillies. Because there have been rumors coming out of that organization since they missed out on Bo Bichette. When we looked at the Phillies lineup earlier, it's crystal clear they need another significant bat. But here's the massive problem. It would be yet another left-handed bat in an already left-handed heavy lineup. You'd be adding Bellinger to a lineup that already features Brandon Marsh, Bryce Harper, and Kyle Schwarber. That's a lot of left-handed hitters all in a row. If Cody Bellinger could hit right-handed or better yet switch hit, this would be a completely different story and conversation. But he can't, so let me pour some cold water on 3 of these 4 potential destinations, because I think we can eliminate most of them pretty quickly. The Blue Jays have that one sliver of hope I mentioned, which is if their internal valuation of Tucker was here at the top, and their valuation of Bellinger is only moderately lower. And that gap is essentially nullified by the fact that Bellinger costs significantly less than Tucker would have cost. Maybe, just maybe, the Blue Jays would still be interested under those specific circumstances. But if that's not the case, if they feel genuinely good about giving Addison Barger regular at-bats and making absolutely certain that Ernie Clement doesn't lose playing time after his breakout season, then I think the Blue Jays are completely out of the Bellinger sweepstakes. The Mets, we've talked about this at length already. I don't think Cody Bellinger has any remitted interest whatsoever in those short-term contracts with opt-outs that have become fashionable in recent years. I don't think he wants to re-enter the market again in 1 or 2 years. He's done that dance already. He's been doing it for what? The last 3 or 4 years now. He's earned the nickname the opt-out king of the offseason for a reason. No way does he want to continue that cycle. He wants to get a long-term contract with guaranteed money that provides security for his family. That's why he's reportedly pushing the Yankees for 7 years. I think he would ultimately settle for 6 if push comes to shove, but the key point is, he wants term, not just average annual value. The Phillies present a different problem entirely. It's simply too left-handed of a fit. I don't see how you add another left-handed bat to that lineup without creating severe platoon disadvantages that opposing teams will exploit mercilessly. And when you factor in where Philadelphia sits relative to the luxury tax threshold, throwing Bellinger's substantial contract on top of everything else they've already committed, I just don't see it happening. The financial mathematics don't work, and the roster construction doesn't make sense, so I'm all in on a Yankees reunion being the final destination for Cody Bellinger. I think this ultimately becomes a game of chicken to see who blinks first. Here's how I see it playing out. Cody Bellinger's camp, led by super agent Scott Boras, will absolutely use the Blue Jays as leverage. They'll use the Mets as leverage. They'll use the Phillies as leverage. They'll point to all of these aggressive win-now teams that want to get to the World Series and claim there's a robust market for Bellinger's services. Maybe that pressure campaign successfully gets the Yankees from 5 years up to 6 years and they meet Cody somewhere in the middle on total dollars. Maybe that's how this gets resolved and the deal finally gets done. But there's another scenario that's equally plausible. Maybe Cody Bellinger blinks first. Maybe he looks at the landscape and realizes, you know what? I need to just get myself into pinstripes and lock this down because the last thing I want is for the Yankees to swing a trade for another outfielder and suddenly I'm completely out of options in New York. Or maybe the Yankees pull their offer entirely and commit to an outfield of Jake Grisham,